More people are flying than ever, and cameras and phones are all part of the trip, capturing unbelievable moments of danger.
Oh my God, the plane is on fire.
For the first time, we unpack the science of what's really going on in these caught-on-camera crises.
Brace for impact, brace for impact.
Revealing in forensic detail how and why flights turn deadly.
He was literally clinging to the air to stay airborne.
Unravelling secret stories from cockpit error to engine failure.
So we just had an announcement we've got an emergency landing.
From freak weather to meltdown on the runway.
Oh my God! It's crashed.
Oh my God.
Discover the surprising truth behind planes gone viral. With more aircraft in the sky than ever before, pressure on pilots has never been higher.
So we're going to dispatch the emergency vehicles.
They need to get us safely, where we want to go, when we want to get there. But every time we take to the air, there's a risk that the pilot may make an error.
Oh my God, he's gonna stall and die. Come on, buddy.
A sudden lack of concentration.
It's like time slowed down.
A miscalculation, or a wrong command at 35,000 feet can end in disaster.
He was literally clinging to the air to stay airborne.
But sometimes a cool head can be all a pilot needs to save the day.
I wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for his greatness.
And turn a potential tragedy into triumph. November 1st, 2011. Lot Flight 016 approaches Warsaw, Poland, after an 8-hour flight from Newark, New Jersey. On board, 231 people.
This flight was the same as any other flight.
For the passengers, the initial descent seems normal. But pilot, Captain Wrona, and Polish Air Traffic Control realise they have a problem.
Things started getting a little unusual, and there was a lot of activity with the flight attendants going back and forth to the cockpit area. You know, something didn't seem right.
The Polish Air Force scrambles 2 F-16 fighters to shadow the flight. But they can only confirm what the crew already know. This Boeing 767 is coming in with no landing gear.
I looked out the window and I saw F-16 circling our plane. You know, this just is not a normal occurrence. There were people who were screaming at certain areas of the plane and just, wanting answers, wanting to know what was happening.
What's happening is the 767 is circling Warsaw to burn off excess fuel, ready for an emergency landing.
And as we were circling around, they didn't tell us, we didn't know why we were making this emergency landing. We didn't know what the actual reason was.
To minimize the risk of an explosion, Captain Wrona wants his fuel tanks running on empty. Wheels or no wheels, this plane's coming down.
We're getting closer and closer to the runway. I see the plane lowering, lowering, lowering.
No one has ever tried to land a 767 without wheels.
Brace for impact, brace for impact. I was never so fearful in my life. The prospect of death being moments away is a daunting prospect.
The aircraft finally screeches to a halt, but the danger is far from over.
Of course, everybody roared with applause. You know, everybody was celebrating. And literally, you had the flight attendant scream, "Get off this plane now!" And made everybody get up and were hysterical and in fear that this plane was going to blow up. There was smoke coming into the plane from the engine that was on fire. It smelled the smoke, and it smelled like burning fuel. Those slide rafts came out, and everybody is literally in a mad dash to get off the plane.
The evacuation takes just 90 seconds. Amazingly, not one of the 220 passengers or 11 crew are injured. The problem begins as the plane leaves Newark. Just after takeoff, Captain Vrona pulls up the wheels. Immediately, cockpit alarms indicate a fault with the hydraulic system powering the undercarriage.
This LOT Polish Airlines aircraft had a hydraulic problem. It wasn't affecting the flight, but it affected the way in which the undercarriage of the airplane's wheels could be lowered.
Fortunately, modern aircraft have an electrical backup if the undercarriage hydraulics fail. Captain Vrona flies on to Poland, assuming he can use the standby system when he comes into land in Warsaw. After a flight of almost 8 hours, he's making his final approach to Warsaw Airport, knowing full well he has no hydraulic system to lower the landing gear. It's time to employ the electrical fail-safe backup. The only problem with the backup is that you can't test it in flight. You can only use it once, and then only when you really need it.
As the aircraft approached Warsaw, then the flight crew obviously needed to lower the undercarriage before landing.
As he nears the airport, Captain Vrona engages the backup system. And nothing happens.
They tried lowering it with the standard system, and that didn't work. They tried to lower with what's called the alternate system. That didn't work as well.
Vrona is high and dry over Warsaw, with no hydraulics, no electrical backup, and no wheels. Flight 016 is in trouble. Deep trouble.
So the crew told air traffic control and circled.
The fail-safe system has failed.
It's one of those days where it's a hard day at the office, but you're trained for it.
With no undercarriage and the lives of 231 people at stake, Vrona has no option but to land the plane with no wheels. In a normal landing, he'd lift the nose slightly to reduce the rate of descent, landing on the back wheels first, before engaging reverse thrust and applying the wheel brakes. With no wheels and no brakes, Vrona's best chance is to touch down resting on the two engines and the rear part of the fuselage as delicately as possible. It's what pilots call a gear up or belly landing.
Eventually they had decided that they had to do a gear up landing, so no undercarriage legs coming down.
This will hopefully ensure it lands relatively smoothly on the engine casings instead of slamming down on the nose or tail, causing the plane to cartwheel and explode.
For a pilot, it's not really something you want to do.
I wouldn't like to have to do a belly landing. I'd very much not like to be a passenger during one.
179 tons of Boeing 767 is about to hit the runway at 180 miles an hour, with minimal directional control and no brakes. Emergency services spray foam on the runway in a desperate attempt to stop Flight 016 turning into a fireball.
It would feel dreadful. The noise would be frightening. The mere fact that you know exactly what's happening, that's going to be absolutely awful.
So why didn't this aircraft catch fire when it smashed down on its engines? Up to 80% of the material used in a modern aircraft is aluminium. It's both light and strong. Crucially, unlike steel, aluminium doesn't produce many sparks during friction. And the remaining fuel on this Boeing is in sealed tanks well away from the engines. So if the landing is controlled and smooth, the hope is the aircraft is less likely to catch fire. Which means, thanks to Vrona and the emergency services at Warsaw Airport, this was one belly landing that didn't go belly up. But how had the fail-safe system failed?
Essentially, the undercarriage didn't come down when they were required to on approach. What they hadn't detected was the fact that a circuit breaker, which is like a fuse, that had popped. Now, why it had popped, nobody knows.
Accident investigators discovered that the supply of electricity powering the backup landing gear had cut out.
That had been switched off, and they didn't know that, and that's why the standby system for lowering the wheels wasn't working. There was nothing wrong with it, it was just switched off.
Someone had accidentally knocked the switch, and this went unnoticed. A simple incident, but one that nearly led to a fatal disaster. 6 days after pulling off his spectacular landing, Captain Vrona was awarded the Order of Polonia Restituta, one of Poland's highest decorations, and acclaimed a national hero.
He knocked it out of the park. Captain Vrona is a hero, and I will be forever indebted to him, because I wouldn't be sitting here today talking to you if it wasn't for his greatness.
Despite increasing levels of aircraft reliability, pilots still require a great deal of training, skill, and crucially, calmness under pressure. To captain a commercial aircraft in the US, the Federal Aviation Authority stipulates you must clock up at least 1,500 hours in the air. But the man at the controls of this light aircraft still has a long way to go. 12,000 feet above Wisconsin. 3 skydivers are seconds away from their 6th and final jump of the day. Two Cessnas are flying in close formation. And just as the skydivers are about to jump,
we were flying and we were getting ready to go ahead and get out. So I was actually the first one out the door, and I climbed all the way out to the outside of the strut. And I hang on out there while everybody else is climbing out of the airplane, getting ready to jump. I felt this jolt, and I knew that the airplanes had collided, so I just let go.
this is one jump the skydivers will never forget.
Getting ready to climb out of the plane
Incredibly, all 11 people on board the planes lived to tell the tale.
I just watched this unfold in front of my face, and it's like time slowed down.
Have 10 bodies skydiving through the air, all going in different directions. It's absolutely a miracle that no one was hurt or killed.
So what caused this spectacular mid-air collision?
Well, the two aircraft were in formation because the jumpers wanted to jump simultaneously and close together and probably link up in the air before they deployed the chutes.
When flying in formation, the lead plane should maintain a constant speed to keep the formation tight. The trail plane must hold its position relative to the lead plane, remaining within 100 feet of the plane up front at all times. It's vital good visibility is maintained. The trail pilot must react to even the slightest adjustments in speed or altitude of the plane in front.
As soon as they see us leave, they leave. So that's generally how it works. Not this time, though.
As the skydivers ready to jump, suddenly they find themselves pinned between the two aircraft. It's only 16 seconds since the first jumpers climbed out.
When you fly in formation, then you generally have the least experienced pilot as the lead, and the more experienced pilot will follow you off to one side and slightly below.
The lead aircraft is responsible for lookout to make sure they don't bump into other airplanes, for navigation, all the rest. And this guy, he has no other responsibility except to keep the other guy in sight and stay with him. That didn't happen.
What did happen was that the trail plane got in front of the lead plane, which was now above and behind. The pilots lost sight of each other, with dramatic consequences. Inexperience led the two planes onto a catastrophic collision course.
Our pilot in the chase plane, it was his first time flying that position in a formation.
In this particular situation, everything is reversed. We end up with the more experienced pilot flying in front, and he ends up on top of the other aeroplane rather than behind, to the side and below.
In the Cessna 180 series aeroplanes, these both were. They've got high wings. When you're like that, neither can see the other.
See and avoid is the rule in this situation. If you don't see, you can't avoid, and I think it's as simple as that.
This guy, who should have been following and keeping in sight the lead aircraft at all times, lost sight of him, didn't know where he was, and the drill at that point is to break off and get clear and then establish level flight, look around, and then find out where he is and then rejoin safely. Okay, that's the drill. But no, he lost sight of him and thinks, oh, what's going on here?
So on top of having the most inexperienced pilot leading the formation, the Cessna design with the overwing restricting vision caused the trail pilot to lose sight of the lead. But why, in this catalogue of errors, wasn't either pilot able to take evasive action sooner?
One of the problems with a mid-air collision is the fact that there's no relative movement of the aeroplane. The aeroplane looks at the same angle out of the window as you approach the collision.
According to the FAA, while looking for other planes in a largely featureless sky, pilots may suffer from a phenomenon called eye myopia. When our eyes scan blank sky, there is little to focus on. Our focal length remains short. We're not likely to see another airplane closing in, even if it's in plain sight. And by then, it's often too late.
So all you have is a dot that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And our eyes are built to detect movement, but there's no relative movement in this case. So actually it can be very difficult to see an aeroplane that you're going to collide with.
Well, I never saw the other airplane coming toward us. What I felt was the other airplane hit us. And I just decided time to go, so I let go. We skydived because we want action, we want things to happen. Well, that was a lot of action.
Miraculously, everyone survives, and without serious injury. Almost as incredibly, no one is struck by falling debris from the exploding planes.
They were damned lucky that somebody didn't either directly get hit by wreckage or didn't get their parachutes snagged in some way while they were trying to get clear of the damaged aeroplanes. The wing that detached, and then the aeroplane tumbling through the sky, the remainder of the airplane tumbling through the sky.
You know, in free fall, we're falling faster than the debris, but once we open our parachutes, it's actually going to be quite opposite, and the debris is going to be falling faster than us. So I wanted to make sure I had as clear of airspace as possible, so I could pull my parachute safely and make it back to the ground.
The potential for having your parachute wrecked or your parachute rigging snagged in something. And the pilot of the terminally damaged aeroplane managed to extricate himself and use his emergency chute, and he landed safely. That's nightmarish.
To have both feet on the ground and to know that I'm going to see my son and I'm going to see my family and I get to continue to live. Not just survive life, but live life. That was a very powerful experience that absolutely changed my life and changed my life for the better.
Mid-air collisions are extremely rare, and accidents at altitude account for only about 10% of all aircraft disasters. Over 2/3 of all airplane incidents occur during takeoff or landing, which makes these by far the most dangerous phases of flying. 23rd July 2016. A Royal Air Maroc Boeing 737 is preparing for takeoff at Frankfurt Airport, runway 18, destination Casablanca. It seems like a standard takeoff, but the plane has barely left the ground when it quickly touches down again. The pilot attempts a second takeoff, but again it can't get off the ground. Something is clearly wrong. This time, the aircraft's tail is perilously close to the tarmac. This plane is running out of runway, and the pilot is running out of options. Finally, on the third attempt, the 737 lifts off, its passengers unaware of how close they came to disaster. So what caused this near catastrophe?
In the case of the Air Maroc, it looks as though the pilots were trying to get the aircraft into the air before it was ready to go.
As you take off down a runway, you set the engine power, you steer the aeroplane straight down the runway, and as the speed builds up, you need to lift the nose. This is called rotation. So one of the pilots will say, this is the speed to rotate the aeroplane at, and then you start to pull the control column or the stick towards the back, the nose lifts up, and then the aeroplane should climb away.
At takeoff speed, the pilot pulls back the control column, lifting the aircraft's nose until it rises to an angle of about 12 degrees, and the plane lifts up.
If you observe an aircraft taking off, it's almost seamless. So as the pilot rotates, the aircraft starts to lift off almost immediately. What happens in the case of that clip is that the aircraft rotates into the flying attitude, but it's sort of almost bouncing along, very light, but it's not climbing away.
So it appears the crew on the Royal Air Maroc flight are rotating at too low a speed, lifting the nose of the plane too early, which could have caused the tail to hit the runway. Fortunately, they managed to control the pitch of the aircraft enough to avoid a tail strike, before increasing their speed to achieve a successful takeoff.
The other possibility is that the correct thrust was not set. The aircraft does appear to be reluctant to fly, but eventually it does, and after that it seems to climb away quite normally, which might be an indication that they suddenly went, not enough power, more, and the aircraft accelerated and climbs away normally.
So although it seems like pilot error is to blame, a Royal Air Maroc statement claims the landing of a Turkish Air flight just moments earlier caused the problem. They point out that the Frankfurt Tower advised the Maroc captain of the presence of wake turbulence over the runway. Wake turbulence is a disturbance in the atmosphere that forms behind an aircraft as it passes through the air. A wingtip vortex is the most dangerous component of this churning air. It occurs when a wing is generating lift, thereby causing a vortex to trail from each tip.
So you've got high pressure air underneath, you've got low pressure air, which is the lift sucking, well, two of them act together to produce what we call lift. What happens to the wingtip when the high pressure underneath meets the low pressure up? The air starts to spin, what's known as a vortex.
Wingtip vortices spread laterally away from the plane, their strength determined primarily by the weight and airspeed of the aircraft. During takeoff and landing, aircraft operate at a high angle of attack, which maximises the formation of strong vortices. This makes wake turbulence most dangerous during takeoff and landing, when there's little altitude for recovery. If the onset of wake is occurring, immediate evasive action is vital.
And that's why there are minimum separation distances for times between aircraft arriving on the same flight path.
As a result of the alleged wake turbulence, Air Maroc said that their captain performed a manoeuvre to accelerate in order to achieve speeds permitting a safe takeoff. However, an accident investigation said it wasn't possible to establish whether this was the cause, and decided to refrain from initiating an investigation.
Certainly the way that the aeroplane was flying doesn't necessarily look as if it was encountering a wake turbulence.
There was some explanation proffered about wake turbulence from the flight before. I don't give that much credence at all.
Whatever the reason, and despite a very shaky start, the aircraft continued safely on to Casablanca. Although flying is safer than ever, flight deck confusion is by far the leading cause of commercial airline accidents, with close to 80% of all incidents caused by pilot error. And when it comes to light aircraft, the sky's the limit. June 30th, 2012. A group of family and friends are returning from a hiking trip in the aptly named Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in Idaho. The aircraft, an aged Stinson 108, is at Bruce Meadows High Altitude Airfield, taxiing down the 5,000-foot dirt airstrip. With full fuel tanks and 4 people on board, the plane is close to its maximum takeoff weight.
It's a 4-seater, with 4 people in it. A lot of light aircraft, you can't have full passenger load and full fuel.
The plane struggles to get lift, and about 3/4 of the way down the strip, it's still not airborne. Rapidly running out of runway, the pilot is about to abort the takeoff when a gust of wind lifts the plane into the air.
This is the time where you just land the aeroplane back again, or you get a taxi home.
The plane may be airborne, but the pilot still can't get the Stinson to climb as expected.
He seemed to have a minute or two where he could have just landed it on the grass, but he doesn't do that.
The Stinson is now getting perilously close to the trees. But how did this seemingly simple takeoff end in disaster? To minimise the risk at high altitude, all pilots are required to use charts to calculate their density altitude before takeoff.
To work out what the engine performance will do, aviators use a system known as density altitude. It's an equation where you bring together 2 factors, the temperature and the thickness of the air, or the thinness of the air at altitude.
Bruce Meadows Airfield is 6,370 feet above sea level, and the outside air temperature is 27 degrees centigrade.
It was not only at high altitude that day, the temperature was higher than it normally was.
Before takeoff, the pilot checked his performance charts and calculated that the density altitude was approximately 9,200 feet.
And the certification of the aeroplane only allows it to take off from airports up to 6,000 feet.
So even though the airstrip is above the maximum takeoff height for this plane, the high temperature and much thinner air make it feel even higher.
As you go up in terms of altitude, then the air gets thinner. This has 2 separate effects. Firstly, the amount of lift that you can generate reduces for a fixed forward speed across the ground. And secondly, the engine actually takes less oxygen into the cylinder each time it is cycled through, and that gives you less power. So you end up in a nasty situation where you have to fly faster and faster in order to generate enough lift, and the engine power is reduced.
Lift is the force that holds an aircraft in the air. Most lift on an aircraft is generated by the wings. Airplane wings are shaped to make the air move faster over the top of the wing. When air moves faster, the pressure of the air decreases, so the pressure on the top is less than the pressure on the bottom. The difference in pressure creates a force on the wing that lifts the plane into the air. Despite a lack of lift and engine power, the plane still manages to get airborne. But why does it struggle to gain height?
As the aircraft takes off and flies at very low altitude, it flies in something called ground effect. This is like a cushion of air underneath from the wings being there. So the aircraft isn't really flying in free air, it's dependent on this cushion of air that it's flying along with.
At high altitude, ground effect can fool a pilot into believing his aircraft can fly. But although airborne, he can find himself without enough lift to climb to escape potential obstacles.
He was literally clinging to the air to stay airborne.
And then as it enters the air around the trees, then it doesn't have any of this ground effect and starts to sink back again. The pilot's obviously trying to steer around the trees, but the problem being that every time you steer the aeroplane, you're actually reducing the amount of lift that's available to keep the aeroplane up, and you're using some of the lift to turn you. So it was pretty much a one-way course to the forest.
For all his bad planning, this pilot had one piece of luck, coming down in the forest. Each impact slows the plane and reduces its energy, softening the final crash as it hits the ground. If they'd cleared the trees, there was little he could have done. Faced with low airspeed and a rising terrain, a turn was out of the question, and the impact would probably have been far more severe.
It's a fairly typical light aircraft accident in terms of the pilot pressing on rather than rejecting the takeoff.
He should have realised that the aircraft's performance was simply not good enough to fly safely. He should have abandoned his takeoff.
Despite some injuries to the pilot, all 4 men were lucky to be able to walk away from this wreckage with their lives. One of the basics for pilots is knowing what your plane is capable of, whatever the weather. High-tech cockpit equipment assists flight crews like never before, but there are still many things computers can't do. Over 99% of all landings are manual, and as yet, there's no such thing as an automated takeoff. 100% of all takeoffs must be carried out by the pilot, and sometimes they have to trust their instincts.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god, my plane! My plane just crashed.
13th of March 2014.
We are evacuating the plane.
18-year-old Hannah Udren is one of 149 passengers on a US Air flight from Philadelphia to Fort Lauderdale.
Oh my god, the plane is on fire. Oh my god.
Using CCTV footage taken from Philadelphia International Airport, in the distance we can see Hannah's plane, US Airways Flight 1702, preparing for takeoff. Hannah's plane has crashed on takeoff.
We are evacuating the plane. Oh my god.
1702, we're going to dispatch the emergency vehicles.
Okay, all right. It seems to be everything's okay.
This is the first time I was ever flying alone, and we take off the runway, and then all of a sudden, the plane skidded and hit the ground very, very roughly. We were all jerked in our seats. Of course, everyone on the plane is screaming and yelling, like, evacuate! No one's really sure what just happened, what's going on.
When the pilot aborts takeoff, the front wheel gear crumples, causing the plane to crash.
Once we went in the air, it sort of sounded like a tire had popped, or like some like loud noise had happened. There was just screaming happening, and the pilots couldn't say anything because everything happened so fast.
But why does Hannah's plane nosedive on the tarmac? Mechanical failure or pilot error? Before leaving the gate, the co-pilot enters the data into the flight computer, which then calculates the speed and thrust needed for takeoff. But there's a problem. Flight 1702 is cleared for takeoff on runway 27L. The co-pilot enters 27R into the flight computer. and that runway is 1,000 feet shorter. After backing away from the gate, the captain spots the error, but the co-pilot fails to update the information. The pilot speeds down the correct runway, 27L, but at 92 miles an hour a cockpit alert triggers.
Retard.
The computer is warning the pilots to slow down. As far as it's concerned, they're rapidly approaching the end of the shorter runway, 27R.
Retard.
Neither pilot understands what the retard alarm means during a takeoff situation, as they more often hear it on landing. But the pilot suddenly decides the plane is unsafe to fly and aborts the takeoff, smashing the aircraft down on the nose gear. The plane could have taken off safely, but the pilots didn't understand what the computer was telling them.
My family is a bit of a jokester family. We kind of joke about everything. So the first thing I did was just send a video of me running away from the plane, because I knew if I didn't have video proof, my parents wouldn't even believe me.
Oh my god, my plane! My plane just crashed!
Analysis from the National Transportation Safety Board shows that statistically, most airline accidents have survival rates of over 80%. Constant improvements in safety and aircraft technology plays a massive role, but sometimes luck has a part too. Amelia, Virginia. This aircraft is being flown by no ordinary pilot. In fact, this is no pilot. The man in this plane has never flown before in his life.
Dude, this dude's gonna oh my god, he's gonna stall and die. Come on, buddy. Get it together.
After persuading the airport manager to let him taxi his new plane down the runway, he soon finds himself airborne with 0 hours flight time.
So this poor guy, who thought he was going to have a drive along the runway, now realises he's flying an aeroplane and wonders what to do about it.
There you go. There you go.
He may have managed somehow to get it off the ground, but it's becoming clear that he has absolutely no idea how to land it. Miraculously, this first-time flyer manages to get down with his new and now battered plane, and more importantly himself, in one piece.
Wow, he is lucky to be alive.
But how did this total novice manage to get airborne?
Really, it's very simple. To make an aeroplane fly, you apply some thrust with the engine while he was taxiing. You apply a little bit more thrust and the aeroplane starts to accelerate. If it gets to beyond the point which is called V1, this is the point at which the aeroplane doesn't have enough space to stop before it reaches the end of the runway, then you might think, well, what do I do? And if you pull the nose up by pulling the yoke backwards, the aeroplane will then lift the nose. And before you know where you are, this machine that's designed to be a bird will start flying.
Dude, this dude's gonna oh my god, he's gonna stall and die.
So we've got a situation here that this person who's found is now a pilot rather than a driver is in the air.
Come on, buddy. Get it together.
Now, the yoke that he's holding is a little bit like a steering wheel. If you turn it to the left, you actually actuate the ailerons at the end of the wings so that they will make the aircraft bank a little bit, and that makes the aircraft turn. So you can drive it like a car. You can steer the steering wheel and make it go around. So you can see the runway beneath him and realise that he can actually go back. The big issue is, how is he going to make it go down safely and stop on the runway?
To land a light aircraft, the pilot should stabilise the plane with the help of the control wheel before using it to line up the plane with the airstrip. Then, when the plane is just off the ground, the throttle is pushed in and the control wheel is pushed forward, which allows the plane to gently touch down, back wheels first.
As we're approaching, we should be putting our flaps out to make this flying machine have a slow speed aircraft that will still have enough lift to cruise down that final approach. This guy is lucky to get the airplane back on the ground. But as they say on all the best movies, don't do this at home, folks.
Wow, he is lucky to be alive.
Every time we fly, we put our lives in the pilot's hands. But flight crew mistakes are rare and valuable lessons are learned every time. The odds of dying in a plane crash are around 1 in 11 million. You're much more likely to be struck by lightning or attacked by a shark. Since the first commercial flight in 1914, airlines have improved safety beyond all recognition, and flying has simply never been safer.